I am Tatar Amir, and let's talk about the book The Inconvenient Indian, a curious account of native people in North America by Thomas King. It is an interesting book. It's also a good book for those who are interested in learning about the issues the Native Americans, First Nations have with the state of affairs in the United States and Canada. Thomas King is known for fictional works and he holds a PhD in Native Studies. He wrote the book based on the information that he gathered through his personal research. Now, from the beginning, let me specify the terminology here that I will use. It's not the same as the one used in the book. The word Indian is generally not the preferred term of reference that is used in North America to refer to the descendants of the pre-Columbian civilizations and societies. Depending on its interpretation, it excludes the Inuits of the north and the groups like Métis, who are a mix of European and original inhabitants of North America. Additionally, the term has a problem as it is also the term for those people who live in India or originate from India. So, different terms are used in North America to refer to the descendants of original inhabitants of North America. In USA, the term Native American is used. However, the term is also problematic as native inhabitant of any area usually implies the person who was born in that area and not necessarily a descendant of the original inhabitants. In Canada, First Nations is used the term, however it seems that Inuit and Métis groups are not very comfortable with that term. It could be confusing to those who are used to the idea that nationality and so one's nation is determined by citizenship or country of residence. For my purposes, I will be using the term First Nations as I find it to be the easiest one to use. Now let's get back to some terminology that the author uses himself in the book. Author uses terms such as North America and North American. The term is used to refer to Canada and the United States of America and their respective population, while Mexico and countries south of it, all the way including Panama, are technically speaking geographically a part of North America. They are not included in the author's definition. Also, author does use whites to refer to non-First Nation population of North America. I believe it is a term he uses sarcastically as a revenge for the term Indian that is useful to refer to all the groups of different tribes and bands of First Nations. The book touches on a number of things. Let's talk about some of them. The first thing that book touches on is a portrayal of First Nations in film by Hollywood and any other visual medium. The First Nations are portrayed as a pre-20th century image of them in terms of how they live as if they are still living before the 20th century. This ties into his discussion of how North America sees First Nations. He divides the image of First Nation as dead, living, and legal. So the dead are the ones that are usually portrayed with full regalia and such things as feather headdress and so on. And this is the romantic image of what everyone likes and uses for visual medium. Live is the image of that is mostly ignored because it is the current state of the First Nations. And finally, this legal image, which is more of annoyance because these are the First Nations that have rights secured by the legislations and treaties, and as such, as they present the annoyance to the rest of the population of America as they hinder it in its quest to exploit the resources of the land. The next subject author touches on is the history of relations between the First Nations and the governments of North America, including all relocations, reservations, treaties, land appropriations, residential schools, and so on. If you're familiar with some of the North American history, you will see a lot of events that will be familiar to you in this section. At the same time, there will be some new events, but they will be similar to the events that are already familiar to you. It is still a great summary for those that are not familiar with the First Nation history of relations with European, Canadian, and American governments. Related to this discussion, author talks about some reconciliatory gestures that have been performed, and while he says that it is good that they have occurred, most of them are symbolic and resulting in little actual action or effect on the life of Native Americans. He also responds to the idea that people should forget about the past and move on. His response to that is that past is still occurs. He uses 1985 as a cutaway point for the past. So anything before 1985, let's say he's going to forget about it. He then presents a list of events that were discriminatory and damaging to First Nations that occurred since that time. So his point is that even if the past is disregarded, the relationship between First Nations and the rest of the population of Canada and United States of America has not improved since then. Finally, let's move to the section of the book that I think is the most important. This section is about what is that the First Nations want. And the author first states it in terms of idea that they want to be left alone, so that the governments of Canada and the United States will stop meddling in their affairs. He points out that whenever First Nations try to run some kind of a profitable business on their land, governments usually come in and with a goal of capturing as much as possible of revenue that these businesses are generating. He specifically demonstrates this with an example of the gambling business, where governments created regulations to gather profits from casinos on the First Nation land through different fees and regulatory requirements that were created. The second idea that relates to what is it that the First Nations want is that they want the governments to honor the treaties and commitments they made. So specifically, he also talks about the land commitments and treaties with regards to land. He lists further examples of times when it took decades for First Nations to get governments to comply with the treaties, or in the cases where the First Nations are still waiting for the governments to comply with the treaties and agreements. He also believes that First Nations should be given a full right to extract resources from their land. And if the treaties are not allowing that, then they should be revisited, because the governments of Canada and the United States have done that for plenty of time, so why can't the First Nations do the same thing and revisit the treaties themselves as well? Finally, he does point to some of the successes the First Nations had in dealings with Canadian and American governments. He specifically points to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and Nunavut. He also discusses the issues he sees with those settlements and those successes as he sees them in the final form that they have been implemented. So overall, I think it's a very good book that provides a view from First Nation perspective on the issues in relationship between them and the rest of the population of Canada and the United States. The book feels a bit too long, though, due to the sections where we get just like a list of things that happened to the First Nations, and if you are specifically familiar with those things, then it will be just a repetition for you. If it's not, like I said, it's a very good review then. But the last few chapters are the ones that provide the full payoff of the book, as far as I see it, because there the author lists specifically the action points that he wants to see completed, or be done, or actioned on. Well, thank you for watching and for listening. If you like this video, please like it. If you didn't like it, don't like it, and please subscribe.